The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the windows of my modest apartment in Chicago's South Loop like it wanted to drown my thoughts. I sat at my kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of bourbon in front of me, staring at the termination letter that had gutted my life. "Dear Mr. Charles Whitaker," it began, the words cold and clinical. "Your services are no longer required at Harrington Industries." 32 years. 32 years of loyalty, late nights, and sacrifices, reduced to a single page signed by Amelia Harrington, the new CEO. She was the daughter of my old friend and boss, Edward, who'd built the company from nothing. Now, with him gone, she tossed me out like yesterday's news, assuming I was just an aging relic. She didn't know the truth, the secret I'd kept for decades, the one that could unravel everything she thought she owned. I poured another drink, the amber liquid burning my throat as I traced the edges of the letter with my finger. My apartment was quiet, save for the storm outside, the kind of quiet that amplifies every regret, every memory. I was 61, not old by my reckoning, but old enough to feel the weight of life spent serving one company. Harrington Industries wasn't just my job. It was my home, my purpose. I'd started as a junior accountant in '89, back when Edward was still a scrappy entrepreneur with big dreams and a bigger heart. I'd worked my way up to CFO, not through charm or connections, but through grit and numbers. I knew every deal, every contract, every skeleton in the company's closet. And there was one skeleton Amelia didn't know about, one that could change everything. I leaned back in my chair, the creak of the wood echoing in the dim light. My eyes drifted to a framed photo on the shelf, me and Edward at a company picnic 20 years ago, both of us grinning, his arm around my shoulder. He'd been more than a boss. He'd been a brother. When he died last year, a piece of me went with him. Amelia, his only child, had been away for years, jet-setting through Europe, playing the prodigal daughter. She'd returned 6 months ago, all sharp suits and sharper ambition, ready to claim her throne. To her, I was just a name on a payroll, a holdover from her father's era. She didn't know I'd saved the company more times than she could count. She didn't know about the deal I'd made with Edward, a deal that could bring her empire crashing down. I stood, unsteady from the bourbon, and walked to the window. Chicago's skyline glittered through the rain, a city I'd helped build in my own small way. Harrington Industries wasn't just steel and glass. It was the backbone of this city's manufacturing, employing thousands, shaping lives. And I'd been its steward, its silent guardian. Now, Amelia thought she could erase me with a signature. My fist clenched, crumpling the letter in my hand. I wasn't done yet. I knew something she didn't, something Edward had entrusted to me alone. It was time to dig up the past, to face the truth I'd buried for so long. This wasn't just about my job. It was about my life, my legacy, and the promise I'd made to a friend. I turned from the window, my reflection a ghost in the glass. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing in me. I'd spent decades being loyal, quiet, invisible. But loyalty has its limits, and mine had been reached. Amelia thought she'd won, but she didn't know the game I was about to play. I poured one last drink, raised it to the photo of Edward, and whispered, "This one's for you, old friend." Then I set the glass down and started planning. The truth was my weapon, and I was ready to use it. The next morning, Chicago woke under a sky as gray as my mood. I stood in my cramped bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, trying to wash away the bourbon and the bitterness. The termination letter lay crumpled on my kitchen counter, a reminder that my life had been upended in a single stroke. I wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. If Amelia Harrington thought she could erase me from Harrington Industries without a fight, she was about to learn how wrong she was. But first, I needed answers. Why me? Why now? And what she didn't know that could change everything. I dressed in my old Navy suit, the one I'd worn to countless board meetings, and headed to the company's headquarters in the Loop. The building was a sleek monolith of glass and steel, a far cry from the gritty warehouse where Edward and I had started. As I stepped into the lobby, the familiar hum of activity, phones ringing, heels clicking on marble, felt like a punch to the gut. This was my world, and now I was an outsider. The security guard, Mike, gave me a sympathetic nod. "Sorry, Charles," he muttered, handing me a visitor's badge. "Orders from upstairs." "Orders," I repeated, clipping the badge to my lapel. The word tasted sour. I rode the elevator to the executive floor, my reflection in the polished doors showing a man who looked tired but resolute. I wasn't here to beg for my job. I was here to understand what Amelia was playing at, and to see if the secret I'd kept for Edward was still safe. The executive floor was quieter than I remembered, the air thick with tension. My old office was at the end of the hall, but I headed for Amelia's first. Her assistant, a nervous young man named Ethan, blocked my path. "Mr. Whitaker, you can't. She's in a meeting." "I'm not here for tea, Ethan," I said, my voice low but firm. "Tell her Charles. She'll want to hear what I have to say." He hesitated, then scurried into her office. Moments later, Amelia emerged, her tailored blazer and sharp bob, making her look like she'd stepped out of a corporate magazine. She was 32, half my age, with her father's piercing green eyes but none of his warmth. "Charles," she said, her tone clipped, like she was addressing a delivery driver. "This is unexpected. I assumed you'd be moving on." "Moving on?" I forced a smile, though my hands clenched at my sides. After 32 years, I figured I deserved a conversation, not a letter. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "The decision was made. The company needs fresh perspectives. You've done adequate work, but we're pivoting to new strategies. Surely you understand." Adequate. The word was a slap. I'd saved Harrington Industries from bankruptcy in '08, negotiated deals that kept us afloat during the recession, and balanced books that would have broken lesser men. But to her, I was a footnote. "I understand more than you think," I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. "Like how you've been restructuring my department, erasing my systems, my processes." "Why the rush, Amelia?" "Afraid I left something behind you can't control." Her lips twitched, a flicker of unease crossing her face before she masked it. "Don't be dramatic, Charles. It's business." "Now, if you'll excuse me." "I'm not done," I interrupted, stepping closer. "I know this company better than you ever will. I know its secrets, its deals, things your father trusted me with. You sure you want to cut me out without knowing what I know?" For a moment, her confidence faltered, her eyes searching mine. Then she straightened, her voice ice cold. "You're treading on thin ice, Charles. Be careful what you imply. Ethan, show him out." As Ethan ushered me toward the elevator, I caught a glimpse of my old office through an open door. A young man in a flashy suit sat at my desk, rifling through files I'd spent decades organizing. My files. My legacy. The sight was like a knife twisting in my chest. They weren't just replacing me. They were dismantling everything I'd built. Back in the lobby, I ran into Linda, my former assistant of 15 years. Her eyes were red, her hands wringing a tissue. "Charles," she whispered, pulling me aside. "They're purging everything. Your reports, your financial models, all shredded or overwritten. Amelia's orders. She's got some consultant, this guy named Victor, going through every record. It's like they're trying to erase you." "Erase me." My pulse quickened. This wasn't just a firing. This was a calculated purge. "Why, Linda? What are they looking for?" She glanced around, her voice dropping to a hush. I overheard Victor talking about old liabilities. Something about a deal from the '90s, something Edward signed. "They're scared, Charles. Scared of what you might know." The '90s. My mind raced back to 1994, the year Edward and I had made a desperate move to save the company, a deal that wasn't entirely above board, one we'd buried deep. Only Edward and I had known the details, and I'd sworn to take it to my grave. Could Amelia suspect it? Or was she just paranoid, trying to sanitize the past to secure her reign? "Keep your ears open, Linda," I said, squeezing her shoulder. "And watch your back." That night, I sat in my apartment, the city's lights flickering through my window like a code I couldn't crack. I pulled out an old lockbox from under my bed, one I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a single file, yellowed with age, containing the contract from '94. It was a partnership agreement with a shady supplier, one that had funneled money to keep Harrington afloat, but violated regulations we'd carefully hidden. Edward had insisted I keep the only copy, a safeguard in case things went south. "You're the only one I trust, Charles," he'd said. Now, that trust felt like a ticking bomb. I poured a coffee, the bourbon bottle untouched tonight. My mind churned. Amelia's purge wasn't random. She was hunting for something. Maybe this deal, maybe something else. But why fire me first? Why not ask me outright? Unless she thought I was a liability, a loose end she couldn't control. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I wasn't just expendable to her. I was dangerous. I called an old contact, Tom, a retired lawyer who'd helped us navigate murky waters in the past. "Charles, you're stirring a hornet's nest," he warned after I explained. "If Amelia's digging into old deals, she's either covering her tracks or looking for leverage. That '94 contract, if it surfaces, it could tank the company. Fines, lawsuits, maybe worse. You sure you want to play this card?" "I don't want to play anything," I said, my voice tight. "But she's trying to erase me, Tom. My work, my name. I need to know what I'm up against." "Then start with Victor," he advised. "Find out what he knows. But Charles, be careful. You're not just fighting for your job anymore." As I hung up, the weight of his words settled over me. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival. Amelia was rewriting the company's history, and I was the last page she wanted to burn. But I had the contract, the truth, and a promise to Edward. The tension in my chest tightened, a mix of fear and resolve. I wasn't just fighting for my legacy. I was fighting for the man I'd been, the man I still was. And I wasn't going down without a fight. The Chicago wind cut through my coat as I stood outside a dive bar in Wicker Park, the neon sign flickering like a warning. It was past midnight, and the city pulsed with a restless energy that matched the storm in my chest. I'd spent the last 3 days chasing shadows, trying to understand why Amelia Harrington was so hell-bent on erasing me from Harrington Industries. Linda's warning about old liabilities and Tom's advice to track down Victor, Amelia's shady consultant, had led me here. Victor was inside, according to a tip from a former colleague, and I was done waiting for answers. Tonight, I'd find the truth, or make it find me. The bar smelled of stale beer and regret, the kind of place where secrets were traded as easily as drinks. I spotted Victor at a corner booth, his slick suit out of place among the flannel-clad regulars. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 30s, with a predator's smirk and eyes that darted like he was expecting trouble. I slid into the booth across from him, my heart pounding, but my face a mask of calm. "Charles Whitaker," he said, leaning back, his voice smooth as oil. "Didn't expect to see you slumming it. Thought you'd be polishing your resume by now." "I'm not here for small talk," I said, my voice low, steady. "You're digging through my work, my files. I want to know why." Victor chuckled, sipping his whiskey. "You're direct. I like that. But you're barking up the wrong tree, old man. I'm just doing my job, cleaning up the mess your generation left behind." "Mess?" I leaned forward, my hands gripping the table's edge. "I kept this company alive when you were still in diapers. So don't play coy. What's Amelia looking for? What's got her so scared she's shredding decades of my work?" His smirk faltered just for a second, and I saw it, the crack in his armor. He set his glass down, his eyes narrowing. "You're fishing, Charles, and you're out of your depth. Walk away. Take your severance and disappear." "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice a growl. "Not until I know what you're hiding. I know about the '94 deal, the supplier contract. Is that what this is about?" Victor's face froze, his fingers tightening around the glass. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice was too quick, too sharp. "That deal's ancient history. Nobody cares. Then why are you tearing my office apart?" I pressed, my pulse racing. Why is Amelia purging every record I touched? She's afraid of something, Victor, and I think it's me. He stared at me, his jaw tight, then leaned in close, his voice a hiss. "You want to play hero? Fine. But you're not the only one with skin in this game. Meet me tomorrow 10 p.m., at the old warehouse on 47th. Bring whatever you think you've got. We'll see who's bluffing. He stood, tossed a 20 on the table, and walked out, leaving me with the echo of his words and a knot in my gut. I'd hit a nerve, but I wasn't sure if I'd gained ground or stepped on a landmine. The 94 contract was my ace, but Victor's reaction told me there was more, something bigger, something Amelia was desperate to keep buried. The next night, I drove to the warehouse, a derelict husk on the city's south side where Harrington Industries had started. The air was thick with the smell of rust and oil, the building's broken windows gaping like wounds. My flashlight cut through the darkness as I stepped inside, the contract from 94 tucked in my coat. Victor was waiting, leaning against a rusted beam, a laptop bag slung over his shoulder. "You're punctual," he said, his smirk back in place. "Let's make this quick. Show me what you've got." I pulled out the contract, holding it up but not handing it over. "This is the 94 deal. Off-the-books payments to a supplier that kept us afloat. Illegal as hell. Edward and I buried it. If this goes public, it's not just fines. It's jail time for anyone tied to it, including Amelia, if she's complicit." Victor's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to me. "Cute, but that's pocket change compared to what I've got." He opened his laptop bag and pulled out a USB drive, holding it like a trophy. This is the real bomb. Emails, Charles. From you to Edward, 2005. Detailing a stock manipulation scheme to inflate Harrington's value during the IPO. You thought those were gone, didn't you? Amelia found them. She's got you by the throat. My blood ran cold. The IPO in 2005 had been a high-wire act, and Edward and I had bent rules to make it work. I'd sent those emails from a private server, deleted them years ago, or so I'd thought. "You're lying," I said, but my voice wavered. "Those emails don't exist." "Oh, they exist," Victor said, stepping closer. "And Amelia's ready to leak them if you don't back off. You go public with that contract, she buries you with this. Mutually assured destruction, Charles. Unless you walk away." I stared at the USB drive, my mind racing. The emails were a death sentence, not just for my career, but for my freedom. Amelia hadn't just fired me. She'd been planning to neutralize me, to ensure I'd never threaten her reign. But why? Why go to such lengths unless she was hiding something even bigger? "Give me the drive," I said, my voice hoarse. "We can negotiate." Victor laughed, slipping the drive back into his bag. "You're not in charge here, old man. But I'll give you a bone. There's a bigger secret, something Edward never told you. Amelia's not his daughter. She's adopted. The real heir? Someone else. And Edward left a letter proving it. Find that, and you've got her. But good luck. Nobody's seen it since he died." He turned to leave, but I grabbed his arm, my grip like iron. "Where's the letter, Victor? Tell me, or I swear I'll burn this company down with me." He yanked free, his smirk gone. "You're a dead man walking, Charles. Back off, or those emails hit the feds." He disappeared into the shadows, leaving me alone with the weight of his words. I drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel. Amelia wasn't Edward's daughter. The revelation was a seismic shift, rewriting everything I thought I knew. If Edward had left a letter naming another heir, it could strip Amelia of her claim to the company. And those emails, they were a sword over my head, proof of a past I'd buried. But I wasn't broken. Not yet. In my apartment, I poured a coffee, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. Victor had given me a weapon, even if he didn't mean to. The letter was out there, somewhere, and I'd find it. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a hunter. Amelia thought she'd caged me, but she'd underestimated the man who'd built her empire. I opened my lockbox, pulling out the 94 contract and a notebook. I started jotting down every place Edward might have hidden that letter. His office, his lake house, the safe in his study. The game had changed, and I was all in. The city outside was quiet, but in me, a fire roared. I wasn't fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting for Edward's legacy, for the truth, for the man I'd promised to protect. Amelia had made her move, but I had mine, and I played to win. The Chicago skyline glittered like a promise as I sat in my apartment, the weight of Victor's revelation burning in my mind. Amelia Harrington wasn't Edward's biological daughter. Somewhere, a letter existed that named the true heir to Harrington Industries, and with it, the power to dismantle her empire. The USB drive Victor had taunted me with, those damning 2005 emails, hung over me like a guillotine, but I wasn't cowering anymore. I'd spent decades being the loyal soldier, the silent protector of Edward's legacy. Now, I was a warrior, and I was ready to strike. I started with Edward's lake house, a secluded retreat an hour north of the city where he'd spent his final years. If he'd hidden a letter, it would be there, away from Amelia's reach. I drove up at dawn, the mist rolling off Lake Michigan like a shroud. The house was a cedar and glass sanctuary, its rooms frozen in time, bookshelves lined with Edward's favorite novels, a chessboard still set from our last game. My chest tightened as I stepped inside, the smell of pine and old leather flooding me with memories. Edward had trusted me with his secrets, his dreams. I wouldn't let him down now. I searched methodically, tearing through drawers, flipping through books, checking under floorboards. Hours passed, my hands growing dusty, my hope fraying. Then, in the study, I found it, a false panel behind a painting of the Chicago River. My heart pounded as I pried it open, revealing a small safe. I tried Edward's birthday, then his wedding anniversary. Nothing. On a whim, I entered my own birthday, December 15th, 62. The lock clicked, and I froze. Edward had chosen me to guard his final secret. Inside was a sealed envelope, addressed to the Board of Harrington Industries, in Edward's unmistakable scrawl. I tore it open, my eyes scanning the single page. It was a notarized letter, dated a month before his death, confessing that Amelia was adopted at birth and naming his biological daughter, Sarah, a woman he'd never publicly acknowledged. Sarah had been raised by her mother in obscurity, but Edward had provided for her secretly, and he wanted her to inherit his shares upon his death. The letter included bank records and a DNA test, irrefutable proof. My hand shook as I read it again. This was the key to everything. Amelia's legitimacy, her control, her power, all built on a lie. I drove back to Chicago, the letter burning a hole in my coat pocket. Victor's thread about the 2005 emails still loomed, but I had a plan. Amelia thought she could bury me with my past, but I'd turn her own game against her. I called Tom, my old lawyer friend, and laid out the strategy. We're going public, I said, but not with a 94 contract. That's too risky. We use the letter, but we do it smart, through the board, not the press. And we need to neutralize those emails. Tom was skeptical, but agreed to help. You're playing with fire, Charles. If those emails leak, you're done. But if you pull this off, Amelia's finished. The next step was riskier. I needed an ally inside the company, someone Amelia wouldn't suspect. I reached out to Linda, my former assistant, meeting her at a quiet cafe near the Loop. Her hands trembled as she clutched her coffee, her eyes darting nervously. Charles, they're watching everyone, she whispered. Victor's got IT sweeping employee emails, looking for leaks. What do you need? I need you to get me into the board meeting next week, I said, sliding a burner phone across the table. Use this to contact me. And Linda, if you hear anything about a USB drive or emails from 2005, let me know. It's critical. She nodded, her jaw tight. For you, Charles. For Edward. I'm in. The board meeting was set for Tuesday, a high-stakes gathering where Amelia would present her vision for the company's future. I spent the days leading up to it preparing with Tom, crafting a presentation that would expose her without destroying the company Edward had built. The letter was my weapon, but I had to wield it carefully. Too much chaos, and the stock would tank, hurting thousands of employees. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice for Edward, for Sarah, for me. Tuesday morning, I stood outside Harrington's headquarters, my suit pressed, my resolve like steel. Linda had slipped me a temporary access card, and I entered through a service entrance, avoiding security. The boardroom was on the 40th floor, a glass-walled sanctum where I'd spent decades shaping the company's fate. I slipped in just as the meeting began, taking a seat in the back, unnoticed for now. Amelia stood at the head of the table, her voice confident as she outlined her plans. Global expansion, tech investments, a new era for Harrington Industries. The board nodded along, dazzled by her polish, blind to her deception. I waited until she paused, then stood, my heart hammering but my voice clear. "If I may, I'd like to address the board." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. Amelia's face paled, her composure cracking. "Charles," she snapped, "you have no business here." "Security. I have every right." I interrupted, holding up Edward's letter. "This is a notarized document from Edward Harrington, dated before his death. It reveals that Amelia is not his biological daughter. His true heir is a woman named Sarah, and he intended her to inherit his shares. I move that the board verify this immediately." Gasps rippled through the room. Amelia's eyes blazed, but her voice was ice. "This is absurd. A forgery. Charles is a disgruntled ex-employee trying to sabotage me." "Then let's test it," I said, meeting her gaze. "The letter includes DNA records. Verify them. If I'm wrong, I'll walk away. But if I'm right, you've been running this company under false pretenses." The board chairman, an old ally of Edward's named Margaret, raised a hand. "We'll review the document, Charles. But this is highly irregular. What's your stake in this?" "My stake," I said, my voice rising with years of pent-up loyalty. "I gave 32 years to this company. I saved it from ruin, balanced its books, protected its people. Amelia fired me, erased my work, threatened me with lies about my past. But this isn't about me. It's about Edward's truth, his legacy. He trusted me to protect it, and I will." Amelia lunged for the letter, but Margaret intercepted it, her expression grim. "We'll adjourn and investigate." "Amelia, Charles, you'll both be contacted." As security escorted me out, Amelia's glare followed me, a mix of fear and fury. I played my card, but the game wasn't over. That night, Linda texted me from the burner phone. "Victor's panicking. He's meeting Amelia at her office now. Something about a USB drive." I knew what it meant. Amelia was cornered, and she'd used the 2005 emails to destroy me before the board could act. I called Tom, my voice urgent. "We need to move fast. Get a forensic accountant to audit the company's servers. If those emails are real, they're on Amelia's system. We can prove she's blackmailing me." Tom worked his magic, and by morning, we had a lead, an IT whistleblower who'd seen Victor upload the emails to a private server under Amelia's orders. It was enough to file an emergency injunction, freezing her access to the server until the board's investigation was complete. Amelia's weapon was neutralized, at least for now. I sat in my apartment, the letter safe in my lockbox, the city humming outside. I'd struck a blow, but the war wasn't won. Amelia was down, but not out, and I knew she'd fight dirty. Yet for the first time in weeks, I felt alive, empowered. I wasn't just Charles Whitaker, the fired CFO. I was the man who'd kept Edward's promise, who'd turned betrayal into justice. The board would decide soon, and when they did, I'd be ready, for victory, or for the fight of my life. The Chicago spring arrived with a quiet vengeance, the city's trees bursting into bloom, as if to mock the turmoil I'd endured. It was April, 2 weeks after the board meeting, where I'd dropped Edward's letter like a grenade, exposing Amelia Harrington's false claim to the throne of Harrington Industries. I stood on my apartment balcony, a cup of black coffee in hand, watching the morning sun glint off the skyline. The board's decision had come yesterday, and with it, the final chapter of a war I'd never wanted to fight. But as the dust settled, I wasn't just a survivor. I was a man reborn, carrying scars and lessons that would shape the rest of my life. The board's investigation had been swift but thorough. Edward's letter, backed by DNA records and bank statements, was undeniable. Amelia was not his biological daughter. Sarah, a 34-year-old schoolteacher living in Milwaukee, was confirmed as Edward's true heir. The board stripped Amelia of her CEO title and majority shares, transferring them to Sarah per Edward's wishes. Amelia fought, of course. Her lawyers spun tales of coercion, claimed I'd fabricated the letter, but the evidence was ironclad. The 2005 email she'd planned to use against me were traced to her private server, proving she'd orchestrated a blackmail scheme with Victor. The board fired Victor and launched an internal probe, while Amelia faced potential charges. She left Chicago in disgrace, her empire in ruins. I wasn't reinstated as CFO. I didn't want it. 32 years had been enough, and the company I'd loved was Edwards, not this new beast under Sarah's stewardship. Sarah, to her credit, was nothing like Amelia. She met me at a quiet diner the day after the ruling, her eyes kind but wary, her hands fidgeting with a napkin. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice soft, "I don't know how to thank you. My father, he never told me about this. I didn't want any of it, but you gave me a chance to honor him." "Call me Charles," I said, managing a smile. "And you don't owe me thanks. I did it for Edward, for his truth." She nodded, her gaze steady. "I'm keeping the company running, but I need people I can trust. Would you consider advising me? Not full-time, just guidance." I paused, the offer tempting but heavy. "I'll think about it," I said, "but I've got my own path to figure out first." That path began with letting go. I sold my apartment, the place where I'd drowned in bourbon and betrayal, and moved to a small house in Evanston, just north of the city. It had a porch swing and a backyard big enough for a garden, something I never had time for. I unpacked boxes of old photos, mementos from my years with Harrington, and a chess set Edward and I played on during late-night strategy sessions. Each item was a piece of my past, but I wasn't mourning anymore. I was rebuilding. I started consulting part-time, not for Harrington, but for small businesses in the area, family-run shops, startups, people with dreams like Edwards once were. I taught them how to balance books, negotiate contracts, avoid the traps I'd seen swallow so many. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it gave me purpose. One client, a baker named Maria, hugged me when I helped her secure a loan to expand her shop. "You're a lifesaver, Charles," she said, her eyes shining. That moment, more than any boardroom victory, reminded me who I was, a man who built things, not just for profit, but for people. I kept in touch with Linda, who'd stayed on at Harrington under Sarah's leadership. Over coffee one Sunday, she slid a folder across the table. "Found this in the archives," she said, her smile sly. "Your old financial models. Sarah's using them to stabilize the company. Thought you'd like to know your work's still alive." I opened the folder, my meticulous spreadsheets staring back at me like old friends. "Thanks, Linda," I said, my voice thick. "Means more than you know." That night, I sat on my porch, the air sweet with the scent of blooming lilacs. I've been reflecting on what I'd learned, the lessons carved into me by betrayal and redemption. Loyalty, I discovered, was a double-edged sword. It could bind you to something greater, but it could also blind you to its flaws. I'd given everything to Harrington, to Edward, and it had nearly consumed me. But in fighting for the truth, I'd found something else, my own worth. I wasn't just a cog in a machine. I was Charles Whitaker, a man who'd faced his past and chosen his future. I thought about Amelia, too. I didn't hate her, not anymore. She'd been a product of ambition and fear, desperate to prove herself in a world that wasn't truly hers. Her downfall wasn't my revenge. It was the consequence of her choices. Justice, I realized, wasn't about destruction. It was about balance, about setting things right. Edward's legacy was safe with Sarah, and I played my part in that. It was enough. One evening, as I tended my garden, planting tomatoes under a fading sunset, Sarah called. "Charles, I found something in Dad's lake house," she said, her voice excited. "A note, addressed to you." She mailed it, and when it arrived, I opened it with trembling hands. Edward's handwriting was faint but clear. "Charles, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't. You protected my truth. You were always more than a colleague. You were family. Live well, my friend." I sat on my porch swing, the note in my lap, tears blurring the words. Edward had seen me, truly seen me, in a way I'd never fully grasped. His words released something in me, a weight I'd carried too long. I wasn't just the man who'd fought for his legacy. I was the man he'd trusted, the man he'd called family. I started playing chess again, setting up the board on my porch and inviting neighbors to join. I taught Maria's son the game, laughing as he tried to outsmart me with reckless moves. I cooked dinners for friends, shared stories of my Harrington days, and listened to theirs. My life was smaller now, but richer, filled with connections I neglected in my years of corporate devotion. What had I learned? That legacy isn't just what you build, but how you live. That betrayal can break you, but it can also forge you into something stronger. That truth, no matter how painful, is the foundation of dignity. I'd lost my job, my world, but I'd gained myself, a man who could stand tall, not because of a title, but because of the choices he'd made. As summer approached, I began writing a memoir, not for publication, but for me. I called it The Ledger of Loyalty, a record of my years with Edward, my battle with Amelia, and the man I'd become. Each page was a step toward peace, a way to honor the past without being chained to it. One morning, I walked to Lake Michigan, the water shimmering under a clear sky. I carried Edward's note, reading it one last time before folding it into a paper boat and setting it adrift. It floated for a moment, then sank, taking with it the last of my regrets. I turned back to the shore, the city alive around me, and felt something I hadn't in years: hope. I was Charles Whitaker, and my story wasn't over. It was just beginning.